Hi guys, it's Ty and welcome back to my channel. So I wanted to do this video about how to read multiple books at once because a short little conversation came up in the booktubers Jess Owens productivity sprints. I don't remember which one, but it was in one of the ones that she did, and it was just a little short conversation where someone had just asked a question about how people read multiple books at once, and a couple of us just kind of chimed in about how we did it and how we suggest people do it. And I just kind of wanted to make a video about how I'm able to read multiple books at once and a couple of tips about how maybe other people can read multiple books at once if that's something that you're interested in. So I kind of came up with 5 easy tips to help someone that is trying to read multiple books at once. So if you're interested and you want to stick around, please do so. So let's go ahead and get started. So before I go ahead and get into those 5 tips, I wanted to say that I have actually started reading multiple books before I started my channel. And I did that because when I started getting into fantasy books, and we all know fantasy books are pretty chunky. They're usually at least over 500 pages. I started noticing that I was getting burnt out reading those really big chunky books. And I was like, oh my God. By the time I was hitting page like 400, I was getting tired of it. And it was making me like tired of reading after a certain point. So I was always like, I need something to break up these really chunky books. So I started to read other things. So I would pick up a different book in a different genre. So that's how I kind of started to read more than one book at a time, because I used to be one of those readers where I could only do one book at a time. I could not read anything else but that one book until I started reading fantasy. And then when I started my channel and I realized that I can't do that, I can't read one book at a time because I have to have content. So I have to constantly be reading, and I need to be reading a little bit faster, because if I'm not reading, then I don't have content to post, and I need to be kind of speeding along my reading. So I need to be kind of reading multiple things at once so that I constantly have content for you guys. So these are my tips. They probably won't work for everybody, but these are some tips that worked for me that helped me be able to read multiple books at once. So my first tip that I have for you guys is to start small. So for me, I can read up to 4 books at a time. But for somebody who is starting to try to read multiple books at a time, I would say start with 2 books at a time. So you want to start small, start with 2 books at a time. That's it. I wouldn't do anything more than that because you don't want to overwhelm yourself. So no more than 2. My next tip is to make sure that the 2 books that you start with are 2 different genres. So if you are somebody who primarily reads fantasy, I would pick another book from another genre. That way you don't get confused, because fantasy can be confusing if you're trying to do 2 fantasy books and then you have 2 fantasy worlds that you are trying to keep track of. So if you have one fantasy, I would maybe do a fantasy in a romance, or a fantasy in a fiction. Or if you're somebody that does horror, a horror and a fiction. Just 2 completely different genres. I think that will help you not only keep your stories apart, but that will help you from being overwhelmed, and that will keep you interested in both of the stories. Because I feel like if you're overwhelmed, you're most likely not going to want to read either one of them. So 2 books, 2 different genres. So my next tip is something that you don't have to do, but I feel like it kind of helps with not being overwhelmed. from having two physical books, but maybe having your books in two different formats. So instead of having the two physical books, do two different book formats. So have like a physical book and maybe have an ebook. Or if you don't have an ebook, have a physical book and an audiobook. I feel like that helps me out, and it helps with, again, with just not being overwhelmed. And then it helps for when I'm not at home or if I'm somewhere else. So if I'm at home, I'll usually do the physical copy, or if I'm on my way somewhere, I will do a audiobook, or usually when I'm traveling is when I do like an ebook. So keeping it two different formats, physical book or ebook and an audiobook. So the fourth one, I feel like is kind of a big one, and I have some examples for this one. And that is to keep your books at different lengths. So if you're going to do two books, which two books is what I suggest, you want to make sure that your books are at two different lengths. Because what we don't want to do is you don't want to have something like this and something like this. No, I don't think you want to have two chunky books. Even if you have a chunky book from one genre and a chunky book from another genre, I feel like that would still take you forever to get through. So what I would suggest you do is do one chunky book from something and then like a short book from something else. And I only say this for people who are just starting out with trying to read multiple books at once. If you're a pro at it, you boo. If you are good at reading multiple books at one time, you do two chunky books at one time. Even I still won't do chunky books at one time. I don't have time for that. So I will do one big book and one like short novella. That way I feel like while I'm trying to trudge through something like this, I can read about 2, 3, 4 of these in the amount it's taking me to read this. Or something like this, and maybe get through something about this size. So this is probably like the regular size of a book. See? Different lengths. You don't want two of the same lengths. Now, it's okay to read multiple books this size. That's fine. But I would not read multiple books that are this size. You talk about being overwhelmed. You don't want to do that. So my last tip is time management. So one of the things that kind of got me when I started reading multiple books at once is just feeling like I had to read all those books in the same day. No, that's also what got me kind of overwhelmed. So what I do now, sometimes I am able to read multiple books in a day, especially if I'm at home before I go to work. I'll read a physical book, and then when I'm at work, if I'm able to, I'll listen to an audio. So that's 2 books in a day, right? But if I'm not able to do that, then one day I might focus on one book, and then the next day I'll focus on another book. Sometimes I won't focus on more than one book in one day. So that way I'm not feeling like I have so many stories going on in my head on the same day. So that's what I mean by time management. Don't feel like you have to read all of the books that you start all on the same day. You can portion it out however you feel comfortable, but don't feel like you have to fit all of that in one day. You don't have to. So again, just for a recap, we can go through all of these. Number 1, start small. What I would suggest, just do 2 books at a time. Number 2, just so you don't get overwhelmed, make sure that the 2 books that you do read are from different genres. Number 3, make sure the books that you do use, if this works out better for you, try different formats. So a physical and an ebook, a physical and an audiobook. Or if it works better for you, 2 physical books is fine. And then the 4th one, books with different lengths. Try not to, if you can, do like a 700-page book and a 700-page book. You'll definitely overwhelm yourself. try like a 700-page book and a 200-page book. It just always tends to work better that way. And the last one, time management. Don't feel like all the books that you start, you have to read them all in the same day. You can always break them up however you feel, but I suggest do one in one day, another day. That way, you're not so stressed out. So those are all the tips that I have for you guys. Hopefully they work out. If you guys feel like you have any other tips for people who are trying to read multiple books at a time, please leave those suggestions in the comments below. That's all that I have for you guys. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.